Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. A lone veteran returns to his remote mountain property, only to find a mysterious sign claiming it's now governed by a fake HOA. What starts as a bizarre prank spirals into sabotage, conspiracy, and bulldozers. One man versus a fabricated empire. You won't believe how far it goes. I was gone for maybe a day and a half. Quick run down to Salem for some supplies, some hardware for the workshop, and a new torque wrench I'd been eyeing for weeks. Nothing out of the ordinary. When I made the final turn off the county road and headed up the dirt track that climbed toward my plateau, I noticed something strange before I even reached my gate. There was a sign planted in the gravel about 30 feet down from my entrance. Brand new, reflective, and bolted onto a steel post rammed into the ditch like someone meant it to stay there forever. The lettering was bold. All caps, black on white. Windmere Ridge Community HOA. Private property. Only members beyond this point. I actually laughed. Out loud. It was the kind of thing you'd see on a cul-de-sac in a manicured suburb, not at the end of a 2-mile trail leading into 40 acres of rocky ridgeline, junipers, and deer trails. I climbed out of the truck, gave the post a nudge. Solid. Someone had done a good job anchoring it. Too bad they didn't realize they were driving it into my land. There are few things I hate more than people pretending to have authority they don't. So, I walked back to the truck, pulled the tire iron from behind the seat, and spent the next few minutes yanking the bolts out and dragging the whole thing back up to my property. The sign ended up leaning against my shed while I fired up the laptop to dig into this sudden appearance of a community HOA. The county assessor's portal confirmed what I already knew. My land sat in unincorporated territory. No HOA ever existed out here. I double-checked before I bought it. Every deed, plat map, and zoning doc confirmed it. Still, I called the cadastral office directly. Took 15 minutes on hold, then a cheerful woman named Peggy pulled up the latest registry. "Nope," she said. "We have no record of any Windmere Ridge HOA. Not here, not adjacent parcels, nowhere in Summit County." I thanked her, closed the laptop, and stared at the sign. It was too polished to be a prank. Someone had paid money to have that made. That night, I checked my perimeter cams looking for a timestamp. 2 evenings ago, just after 9, a white F-150 pulled up, lights off, and 2 figures jumped out. In the dark, they installed the sign and drove off within minutes. No license plates on the footage. Clever, but not clever enough. I documented everything. Photos of the sign, screenshots from the cameras, time-stamped metadata. Military habits die hard. I created a new folder called HOA BS and dumped it all in there. The next couple of days were quiet. I figured maybe it was some rogue neighbor trying to be cute. Then, early Thursday morning, I stepped outside to water the junipers near the driveway and found something else taped to my front door. A printed notice on letterhead with the same logo from the sign. "You are in violation of HOA Covenant Article 4, Architectural Vehicle Standards. The large truck currently parked near your structure is incompatible with visual guidelines. Please remove it immediately. This constitutes your first formal warning." It was signed in blue ink by someone claiming to be Director of Compliance. I stood there for a minute, rereading it 3 times. Then I looked back toward my truck. A Ford F-350 Super Duty, desert tan. Military plates. The same truck that hauled tools, lumber, feed, and gear. The same truck that had been parked there every day since I moved in. Now, apparently, it offended someone's fictional design guidelines. I took a deep breath, peeled the note off the door, and added it to the growing digital archive. Then I did what any sane man would do when faced with invisible bureaucracy trying to strong-arm him on his own land. I brewed a strong cup of coffee, opened a legal pad, and started writing names and questions. Who the hell thought they could invent a fake HOA out here in the wilds of Utah? And more importantly, what exactly did they think would happen when they picked a fight with someone like me? It was still early when I finished logging that violation notice into my file. I hadn't planned to spend the day investigating fake bureaucracies, but the universe had other plans. I made a few calls to a buddy of mine who worked with the county sheriff, to an old Army friend turned attorney, and to a local reporter I met once at a veterans fundraiser. Just planting seeds. Didn't expect anything immediate. I was halfway through replacing a warped joist in the back of my workshop when the piece shattered, a sound I hadn't heard since Afghanistan. Deep, metallic, rhythmic, not gunfire. Worse, a tracked engine closing in. I dropped the drill, stepped out, and saw it. A goddamn mini bulldozer grinding up the slope of my property, heading straight for the shop. My truck was parked out front, same place as always, and in seconds, the dozer was on it. No hesitation. The operator lowered the blade and drove the steel right into the side of my Ford like it owed him money. The first strike ripped the driver's door clean off. The second crunched the rear panel and shattered the tailgate window. I was already sprinting. "Hey, stop! You son of a—" The operator didn't hear me at first. The engine noise was deafening, but as I got closer, he turned and froze, locked eyes with me. I don't know if it was the beard, the look in my eyes, or the unmistakable tan and green veteran ball cap I was wearing, but something about my presence hit him like a freight train. His eyes dropped to the license plate still hanging crooked on the crushed rear bumper, the words U.S. Army Veteran still visible despite the bent metal and busted taillight. That's when he panicked. He bailed, literally jumped out of the operator's seat while the bulldozer was still idling, treads grinding slowly forward. He landed hard, scrambled to his feet, and bolted toward the brush without looking back. I didn't chase him. I wasn't about to run headfirst into the trees without knowing if he was alone. Instead, I sprinted to the machine and hit the kill switch. The rumble died, replaced by a silence that somehow felt louder. I stood there breathing hard, looking at the wreckage of my truck. Hood crumpled, cab mangled, windshield spiderwebbed, doors hanging off, the veteran plate still hanging by one bolt, bent like a pretzel but unmistakable. The only thing I could think was, who in their right mind greenlit this stunt? I climbed up into the dozer's cabin, smelled like sweat and pine air freshener. On the seat, tucked under a clipboard, I found a folder labeled Architectural Enforcement Directive. Inside, diagrams of my property, including my truck's exact location, circled in red marker. The document had the same logo I'd seen on the sign. Windmere Ridge HOA Architectural Committee. There was a fake seal and a forged permit attached. I took photos of everything, every page, every label on the dashboard, every dent in my truck. Then I walked back inside, grabbed my phone, and called dispatch. When the sheriff's deputy showed up an hour later, I recognized him immediately. Tyler Winslow, National Guard MP out of Provo. We'd done weapons drills together years back. I didn't even have to explain the whole thing. One look at the scene and his face turned to stone. "You tell me this is a real HOA," he said, "and I'll eat my badge." "They're about as real as my imaginary alpaca farm," I said. "But they've got bulldozers now." We secured the area, took statements, and loaded the dozer onto a flatbed for impound. Tyler promised to get prints and VIN records checked by morning. Before he left, he leaned in close. "Kevin, someone out here thinks they're running a fiefdom. Might want to start treating this like enemy territory." "I already am." By nightfall, I'd uploaded everything to a secure drive, backed it up to a hard copy, and texted my attorney friend. "We have a live one." I looked out at what was left of my truck, then down at my hands, still dirty with grease and pine dust, still steady. My gut told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. By the next morning, I had 3 voicemails and 2 text messages waiting. One from my attorney friend, Mark Delaney, former JAG, now civil litigation specialist in Salt Lake. Another from Deputy Winslow with initial dozer registration info. The third was from the local news producer I'd tipped off 2 days ago, now very interested in what I'd hinted at. But what really kicked things off was the paper trail that came with the dozer. According to the VIN records, the bulldozer was rented from a landscaping equipment outlet in Park City. The lessee? A company called Windmere Maintenance LLC, registered just 3 months ago by none other than Randall T. Ellison. Name rang a bell. I dug through some of my saved searches. There he was, a failed developer who'd gone bankrupt in 2019 after a golf resort project collapsed due to environmental violations and unpaid contractors. Public records showed lawsuits, liens, and at least one foreclosure. Apparently, Randy hadn't left the area. He'd pivoted from failed luxury housing to full-on HOA cosplay. I spent the morning documenting it all: ownership records, the LLC registration, court records from Ellison's bankruptcy. The pieces were snapping into place fast. Windmere Ridge wasn't an actual community. It was a fiction invented by a man with no authority who was now leasing heavy machinery to enforce pretend covenants. I met Mark in town at a diner we both liked. He was already scrolling through the evidence on his tablet. "You've got enough for a civil suit yesterday," he said. "But Kevin, this smells worse than a property dispute. If this guy is collecting dues or issuing violations, it's wire fraud, mail fraud if he's sending letters, and if he's impersonating any public office, that's a federal matter. We agreed on the next step. Hit Ellison with a cease and desist, file a civil complaint for property damage and trespassing, and simultaneously refer the matter to the DA's office. Mark would handle the filing. I'd handle the exposure. That evening, I met with the producer from Channel 8 News. I brought printouts of the photos, the fake sign, the violation letter, the crushed truck, the HOA seal on the Dozer directive. I showed her the license plates. Her eyes widened. You're telling me someone made up an HOA and used a bulldozer to enforce their fake rules? No. I'm telling you they targeted a veteran's property and committed felony vandalism under the guise of authority they don't possess. She nodded like she'd just found her lead story for Sweeps Week. By the time I drove home, the area around my shop looked like a crime scene. Yellow tape fluttered from fence posts, tire marks still raw in the dirt. I didn't bother to clean it up. The wreckage told a story, and I wanted every neighbor, ranger, and delivery driver who passed by to see it. What I hadn't expected was the envelope waiting in my mailbox. No return address, typed and folded neatly. This is your final warning. Continued non-compliance with HOA guidelines will result in enforcement escalation. Your residence is under review for architectural violations. Windmere Compliance Unit. They doubled down. No name, no phone number. Just that same damn seal, now printed in grayscale. I walked back inside, slid the letter into a plastic sleeve, and sat down at my workbench. I added it to the folder, then I opened a new file. Subject: Potential criminal impersonation and fraud. Randall T. Ellison. Targets: fictitious HOA activity, unlicensed enforcement, fraud via mail and property damage, possible extortion. Recipients: County DA, Utah State Attorney General. Federal Bureau of Investigation. They'd brought a bulldozer to a quiet property in the mountains. I was about to bring them federal heat. I woke up the next morning to the shrill alarm of my perimeter system going off. Motion sensor, southeast side. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes deer wandered too close. But when I pulled up the camera feed on my tablet, what I saw wasn't wildlife. Two men, both wearing dark polo shirts with a cheap embroidered patch. HOA Enforcement Division. They were crouched near my front deck, one of them holding a clipboard, the other trying to jimmy the side door with a flat tool, like he thought no one was watching. My blood ran cold, not with fear, but with that focused clarity I hadn't felt since my last deployment. I grabbed my boots and .45, not because I intended to use it, but because I was done pretending this was some sort of harmless misunderstanding. Before I could make it outside, the alarm triggered again. One of them had moved around to the rear, testing the window frames. Idiots. My house wasn't just home, it was a fortress in disguise. Steel frame doors, security film on every pane, alarm sensors on every entry point, and then came the sweet, panicked sound of the siren kicking in. One of them must have tripped the magnetic contact. Both men jumped like they'd been electrocuted. They looked up at the eave where the camera clearly stared down at them, blinking red. Then they bolted, no hesitation, cutting through the trees toward the west ridge. I called it in immediately. Deputy Winslow was back on the line in under 10 minutes. You get faces. Full color, clear as day. I'll send you the screenshots. An hour later, I met him at my place. We reviewed the footage frame by frame. One of the men looked vaguely familiar, but it was the other that made Tyler's brow furrow. I know this guy, he muttered. That's Shane Goddard, local dirtbag. Pled out of a wire fraud case last year. Probation. And now impersonating law enforcement. Bold move. We'll pick him up by dinner, Tyler said. And they did. Both of them. Turns out they'd been recruited by Randy Ellison as enforcement officers for Windmere Ridge HOA. No background checks, no licenses, no legal authority. Just a $50 shirt and a script. They sang fast, once brought in, especially when shown the footage. Claimed Ellison had told them it was community code enforcement and that the land belonged to a future subdivision where tenants were expected to comply. When pressed, they admitted they were paid under the table and given photos of my property, marked with known violations. That same afternoon, Mark filed our civil suit, $350,000 in damages, not counting punitive. Charges included destruction of property, criminal trespass, harassment, and civil conspiracy. We served Ellison personally at his fake HOA office, which hilariously turned out to be a trailer parked behind a shuttered model home. Things moved fast after that. The DA's office, now armed with the video of the truck demolition, the phony enforcement unit, and the fake architectural directives, looped in state investigators. But it was when we interviewed a few neighbors that the full scope of the fraud came to light. 7 different property owners in the area had received dues notices or fine assessments from Windermere Ridge HOA. 2 had paid. One elderly couple had forked over nearly $1,200 over 3 months, thinking it was some form of back taxes. That made it interstate wire fraud. That made it federal. And just like that, Ellison wasn't a nuisance anymore. He was a target. By the time the feds got involved, things had gone from bizarre to downright surreal. I'd spent the better part of a week helping Mark compile affidavits from the neighbors who'd been scammed. 2 retirees, a single mother living in a prefab on the ridge, and a guy named Dorian with a solar panel business who'd been hit with a landscape non-compliance fine because he let the native grass grow. All of them had been either intimidated or conned into handing over payments to Windermere Ridge HOA, which of course still wasn't registered anywhere legitimate. We ran checks with the Utah Department of Commerce, IRS, county property tax offices. Nothing. No EIN, no homeowner charter, no board of directors. Just Randy Ellison, the man who invented a community on paper and enforced it with threats and diesel engines. I was in town getting an oil change for the one remaining vehicle I had that still ran when Mark called. I picked up on the first ring. "Kev," he said, "you're not going to believe this. One of the guys arrested for trespassing. Shane, he tried to post bail with a check from Windermere Ridge HOA's operating account." "You're kidding." "I wish. The account exists. We pulled records with a subpoena. It's got almost $18,000, mostly Zelle transfers, checks from local banks, even 2 direct deposits marked as community enforcement fees, all from locals. So the HOA's got a bank account under a fake entity. That's real enough for wire fraud. That's the idea. FBI's officially reviewing now. And get this, they're sniffing tax evasion too. No reporting. No income declaration. He's cooked. It wasn't even the most surreal thing that happened that day. Later that afternoon, a black SUV pulled up at the edge of my property. I was outside chopping deadfall into firewood when I saw it crawl up my road slow, cautious. I reached for my phone but didn't need it. The driver's window rolled down and out popped the unmistakable face of someone I'd never thought I'd see again, Angela Menendez. Now Special Agent Menendez, FBI Field Office, Salt Lake City. We'd crossed paths years ago during a joint task force op. She'd been CID back then, brilliant, ruthless, and not one to waste time. "Kevin Waden," she said, stepping out, her boots crunching in the gravel. "Last time I saw you, you were bleeding from the ribs and cussing in Pashto, and you were throwing me morphine like M&Ms. Still are, figuratively." We shook hands. She got straight to the point. They'd reviewed my complaint, confirmed the paper trail, the video footage, and had officially opened an investigation into fraud, impersonation of government authority, and criminal conspiracy. She'd be taking over from the state DA. "We believe Ellison's been running similar scams across 3 counties, she said. Fake HOA notices, some fines, 1 attempted lien filing in Wasatch County that we just had tossed. You're the first person to punch back." Lucky me. I didn't say it wasn't satisfying. That night, as I was sitting at my workbench cataloging more of the fake HOA mailers, I heard the roar of an engine again. For a half second, my chest tightened, thinking, God, not another bulldozer. But it wasn't a dozer. It was Ellison himself, in his beat-up Silverado, pulling up just past the front gate, stopping about 20 yards out, engine still running. I stood on my porch, arms crossed. I wasn't armed, but he didn't know that. His posture was strange. Half-cocked bravado, half-confused panic, like he thought he might still talk his way out of this. He stepped out and walked a few steps closer. "Knew you were trouble the moment I saw that truck," he said, nodding toward the empty space where my Ford used to be. I didn't answer. "You think this land is yours, huh?" he said. "You don't even understand what this development could have been. A real community. Order, standards, not this junkyard you call a homestead." I raised an eyebrow. "You bulldozed a military vehicle, Randy. You sent felons to my house. You've got a fake seal and fake laws. That's not order. That's delusion." He took another step but didn't make it far. Blue lights exploded behind him, and 2 cruisers came up the hill like cavalry. Deputy Winslow stepped out with 2 other officers and read Ellison his rights right there in the dirt. He didn't resist. In fact, he looked relieved, like part of him wanted it over. They cuffed him and loaded him into the back of the car. As the door shut, he looked back at me. "You ruined everything," he muttered. I didn't answer. What was there to say? By the time the night was over, my property was quieter than it had been in weeks. The stars were out. The moon hung over the ridge like a silver sentinel. Inside, I made coffee. Not because I needed it, but because some habits don't die. I watched the security cam feed while the kettle boiled, checked the locks, rewatched the footage of Ellison being hauled off frame by frame. The storm was far from over. Charges would take time. The court system was slow. But for the first time since this nonsense started, I felt momentum. And that's when the letter came. The next morning, same typeface, same seal, but this one was different. Windmere Ridge HOA is not responsible for actions taken by independent community associates. You are advised to withdraw legal proceedings to avoid escalation. This is your second and final notice. No name, no signature, just that damn seal again. They were still trying, and I was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, out of calculation. That letter proved something I'd suspected, but hadn't said out loud. Randy Ellison wasn't working alone, even in cuffs, even after the nightly news ran a full 5-minute segment showing drone footage of my wrecked truck and his imaginary enforcement. Someone was still running the con. Next morning, I was already at the sheriff's office when they opened. I met with Deputy Winslow and Special Agent Menendez. I brought the new letter in a Ziploc bag, untouched. Angela took one glance and cursed under her breath. Escalation, she asked. Thinly veiled threat. Third-party involvement. And unless Ellison smuggled a typewriter into holding, someone else is still printing these. Angela nodded, already thinking 2 steps ahead. We'll subpoena his digital correspondence, phone, email. If there's a second account holder on the HOA bank account, we'll find them. By noon, the story had gone statewide. The news station ran a follow-up featuring interviews with 2 other landowners who came forward. One of them had been threatened with forced compliance landscaping if they didn't trim their cottonwoods. They had voicemail recordings. Mark submitted them as supplemental evidence in our civil case, but it was my neighbor down the ridge, Old Man Josiah, who tipped the balance. He called me after lunch, voice shaking. "Kevin," he said, "I think someone tried to poison my dog." "What?" "I found raw hamburger behind my shed, mixed with blue pellets." Rat poison, classic intimidation trick. I told him to hang tight and called Winslow immediately. They collected the evidence, and sure enough, traces of brodifacoum, a powerful anticoagulant. The vet confirmed Josiah's dog hadn't eaten it, but the intent was clear. The same day, a local realtor called me. Said he'd received an anonymous warning letter about unstable individuals living near Windmere Ridge and asking if he'd consider reporting unusual activity on their behalf. It had the same seal, the same template. They were trying to manipulate the local economy now, pressuring agents, neighbors, even utility companies. Angela had enough. The FBI expanded the probe and flagged the HOA account for financial tracking. That evening, they found something interesting. A second signer on the bank account, Lisa Romero, mid-40s, former assistant to Randy Ellison during his failed development days. No obvious criminal record, but her name had been tied to shell companies in the past. She was the treasurer of the fake HOA, and she hadn't been touched yet. I remembered seeing her name at the bottom of one of the fake architectural directive slips in the Dozer's glove compartment. Back then, it hadn't meant anything. Now it meant conspiracy. Angela called me later that night. Feds are prepping search warrants for Romero's house and the storage unit registered under Windmere Ridge LLC. You want to bet what's in there? Files, letters, printer, maybe some of those awful polo shirts. And if we're lucky, she said, evidence of who else is involved. The next day, the FBI executed the warrants. What they found was worse than I imagined. Dozens of HOA-style letters, threat templates, a printed HOA charter listing fines for everything from mailbox height to presence of military vehicles, a logbook marked violators. My name was circled multiple times. There were photos of my property, some taken from angles that could only have come from a drone. That's when I realized they'd been watching me for weeks, maybe longer. They also found a ledger with names, addresses, amounts paid, some as high as $2,000. It was a fraud ring, small scale, local, but no less real. Romero was arrested the same evening. She cried on camera, told agents she was only handling paperwork, and tried to pin everything on Ellison. But the signatures matched. She wasn't just a bystander. She was running the finances while Randy played HOA kingpin. Angela called me after the arrest. "We've got enough for federal charges. Fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, attempted extortion, criminal impersonation, wire fraud. Likely minimum 10 to 12 years if it sticks." "Good," I said. "Let them explain to a real judge how fake rules justify a real bulldozer." I hung up and looked out of the window. The sun was setting behind the ridge. Quiet returned to the plateau, but not the way it had been before. Now the quiet buzzed with the weight of what was coming next. Courtrooms, testimony, cross-examinations. But for the first time in weeks, the threat had a shape. Names, evidence, consequences. They'd built a fantasy kingdom. I was about to watch it burn. The trial date was set for early spring, but even before the court proceedings began, Windmere Ridge had become a local punchline. The term fake HOA was being tossed around in city council meetings and news headlines, and a meme of Randy Ellison in a polo shirt with the caption "Architecture Enforcement, now hiring" made the rounds on local Facebook groups. I didn't share it, but I saved it. For morale. The damage, however, was no joke. My truck was still a mangled carcass under a tarp behind my workshop. The insurance adjuster had come by weeks ago, shook his head, and muttered something about deliberate malicious damage and pending subrogation. Translation: they'd pay eventually, but I'd have to sue someone else to make it right. Which was fine. I had that covered. Mark was relentless. Our civil suit expanded after Romero's arrest. He filed an amended complaint, adding her as a co-defendant, and our damages now reached over $500,000, factoring in my vehicle, attempted intimidation, legal fees, and emotional distress. But more importantly, Mark got what he called a strategic miracle, a preliminary injunction. The court ordered that no person affiliated with Windmere Ridge HOA or any related entity could initiate contact with me or anyone else on the mountain without going through legal counsel. That alone was a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about finding more poison behind the shed or a fake code enforcement note taped to my door. Still, I kept cameras rolling. Call it habit, paranoia, discipline. Take your pick. Then came the unexpected twist. Angela called again. Her voice was curt. "We found someone else," she said. "Name's Terrence Holt. He used to work in zoning enforcement for the county 5 years back. Quit after some complaints. He was the one providing fake approval stamps and zoning notices for Ellison's letters. I remembered the violation letter pinned to my door weeks ago. It had a faint green stamp that looked official. At a glance. "Let me guess," I said. He thought no one would check. Oh, he knew. But this is bigger. Holt ran a little side gig, charging consulting fees to developers. He'd write fake zoning exemptions and sell them as pre-approvals. Ellison was just the worst of his clients. So now we had a former county employee turned fraudulent bureaucrat who'd been enabling this entire fantasy kingdom with counterfeit authority. The depth of the con was staggering. Angela was already working with the state AG to prepare a racketeering case. The conspiracy was no longer isolated to one man with a delusion. It was a multi-person fraud ring, preying on the ambiguity between rural jurisdiction, private property rights, and people's fear of legalese. It made sense in the worst way. Ellison provided the intimidation, Romero handled the money, Holt provided the paper trail, and together they built something that looked just real enough to make most people comply. I wasn't most people. Trial prep began in earnest. Mark and I spent days cataloging documents, footage, printed threats. He coached me on depositions. Angela forwarded me a list of federal witnesses, including some of the other landowners who'd been pressured, fined, or harassed. One of them, a widow named Cheryl, broke down in tears describing how she'd been told she'd lose her septic permit unless she paid a retrofitting compliance fee to the HOA. She gave them $800. That $800 had ended up in Romero's ledger marked as septic adjustment. We included her in the civil suit. On the day of the pretrial hearing, I stood in the courthouse lobby watching Randy Ellison shuffle past in a suit that didn't quite fit. He looked smaller than I remembered. Romero was right behind him, hair tied tight, clutching a folder like a life preserver. Holt came in last, wearing sunglasses indoors like that would somehow make him invisible. The courtroom was packed. Press, locals, a few off-duty deputies. The judge reviewed the case summary, and when Mark laid out the civil claims, I watched Ellison flinch at the words: willful destruction of private property, deliberate impersonation of governance authority, organized effort to extort money, and suppress legal resistance. It hit differently when said out loud. The real-world weight of what they'd done. The judge ordered the case to proceed to trial with a fast-track federal review given the scope and nature of the fraud. Angela nodded to me from the back row. Her job was nearly done. Mine was only halfway. As we stepped outside into the brittle Utah wind, Mark turned to me and said, "They thought you'd fold." "They brought a bulldozer to a land war," I replied. He grinned. "You're writing that down, right?" I didn't answer, but I was. The courtroom was silent as the bailiff called the case. It had been 3 months since the pretrial hearing, and in that time, the story had gone national. Not because of the money involved, it wasn't millions. Not because of violence. Thankfully, no one got hurt. But because of the absurdity. A fake HOA bulldozing a veteran's truck over imaginary violations. That headline practically wrote itself. I sat behind the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since my retirement ceremony. On my left was Mark, cool as ever. Across the aisle sat Ellison, Romero, and Holt with their respective attorneys. None of them looked like they were sleeping well. The prosecution's opening statement didn't hold back. Fraud, conspiracy, extortion, willful impersonation of government authority. The jury, a panel of 9 women and 3 men, listened with jaws set and eyebrows high. By the time Mark took over with our civil claims, they already looked half convinced. The evidence told the rest of the story. Surveillance footage, drone photographs, financial ledgers, copies of letters stamped with fake zoning approvals, the HOA charter that read like a petty tyrant's diary. Testimonies from neighbors, people like Cheryl, Josiah, and a younger family who had been told they'd lose power unless they paid a compliance deposit. The turning point came when Angela Menendez took the stand. Calm, precise, every answer backed by investigation logs, communications records, and federal subpoenas. At one point, Holt's lawyer objected to her editorializing when she referred to the group as a domestic fraud cell. The judge overruled. "She's quoting her official report, counselor. Sit down." When my turn came, I told it straight. From the day I found that bogus sign on my land to the moment the bulldozer crushed my truck. I didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. I let the facts speak, and the facts were loud. Mark guided the jury through the monetary damages, then presented the psychological side, living under surveillance, threats, attempted intimidation, a federal-level scam running just outside my front door. Ellison's defense tried to pin everything on Romero, claiming she'd gone rogue. Romero's team flipped it, arguing Ellison was the mastermind. Holt's lawyer insisted his client believed the documents were advisory. None of it held. After a 4-day trial, the jury took just under 3 hours. Verdict: guilty on all federal charges, liable for all civil claims, restitution to be paid, $525,000 plus punitive damages. Prison sentences: Randy Ellison, 14 years in federal prison. Lisa Romero, 12 years with a recommendation for no parole. Terrence Holt, 10 years, stripped of all future eligibility for any public contract or zoning-related employment. As the sentences were read, Ellison sat frozen, not angry, not shocked, just small, shrinking into himself like the walls were closing in. Mark turned to me after it was over. "That's what a paper empire gets you." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave one short statement. "If you're going to invent a government, don't do it on my land." I went home that night, parked my new F-350 next to the ruined one I still hadn't towed away. A reminder, not of fear, but of resolve. The next morning, I took the battered metal sign from the wreckage of my gate and mounted it to a fresh oak post right at the edge of my land. Black letters, clean wood. One sentence: "This land is not a community. This land is mine." And for the first time in a long time, the ridge was quiet. Not the tense quiet of waiting for the next blow, but the peaceful kind, the kind you fight for, the kind you earn.